Coming up in this episode of Laugh Time at Comedy Cabaret.
To examine your bladder, what they do is they take a tube through your urethra into your bladder. And at the end of the tube is a light and a camera on a little tiny iPhone 12.
Tonight, a Laugh Time at Comedy Cabaret special with comedian Rabbi Bob Alper.
All of this coming up on Laugh Time at Comedy Cabaret.
Well, thank you. I've been back in the green room, and now I have a chance to look at you, and it's absolutely true what they say. They say there are three stages in life. There's youth, adulthood, and you look wonderful. Look, it's great to be back in doing live comedy. Zoom, terrible, especially for comedians. I did about 50 events during Zoom. I didn't do stand-up, but I did humor and a lecture. And if you ever want to know what it's like to tell something funny where the audience is muted, what you want to do is stand opposite a wall and tell it a joke. For me, it was helpful because doing comedy with a muted audience gave me some theological research. I found out what an after-death experience is like. So I tried unmuting the audience, and Steve Martin has a line. He says, "The enemy of comedy is distraction." And when you're building to a joke, you need people's full attention. So I'd be building to a joke, and the mics would be open, and in the middle I'd hear, "Harry, would you get me a Diet Coke while you're in there?" Well, that's not so bad, but it got worse. The worst one was in the middle of building to a joke, I heard, "Who's a good boy? Who's a good boy? Yes, you are. What a good boy." Oh, this whole thing about being a rabbi in a stand-up comedy came together one day in Philadelphia. I lived in Vermont. I was changing planes in Philly on the way to a show in L.A., and a woman walked over to me, did a double take. She said, "You're Rabbi Alper, aren't you?" I said, "Yes." She said, "You probably don't remember me," and I didn't. She said, "But I was a kid in your congregation here in Philadelphia during the 80s. And I used to watch the way you would teach and lead services, counsel and preach. And so I decided to become a rabbi anyway." I think the most exciting event of my entire career took place back in the early 90s. I was performing in Manchester, New Hampshire at the Temple Adat Yeshurun 6th Annual Deli and Comedy Night. It was just before the presidential primaries, and George and Barbara Bush came by for a campaign appearance. It was very exciting. I had a manager at that time, and wasn't sure whether they were coming or not, and so the reporters tracked her down in her home on Long Island. She said, "I'm sitting there in my pajamas eating my Rice Krispies and saying on the phone, 'I can neither confirm nor deny that the President of the United States will be present at the Temple Adat Yeshurun 6th Annual Deli and Comedy Night.'" But he was there, and I was actually speaking with him. When Barbara walked over, she said, "George, do you want pastrami or corned beef?" He said, "Gee, I don't know." And it was at that moment that I became a presidential advisor. I said, "Sir, the pastrami is very tasty. You might want to try it on rye bread, hold the mayo." So I was born and raised in Providence, Rhode Island, part of a large dysfunctional extended family, not a close-knit group. I went off to college. My parents moved out of town at that point. I'd only been back maybe 4 or 5 times attending high school reunions. But I was there and walking around our old synagogue one time. And sitting cutting cake, there was my first cousin whom I hadn't seen in 24 years. And I told her who I was. She looked at me, she said, "You know, I was in Barnes & Noble where I saw your book, and I almost bought it." And it wasn't the easiest thing being a little Jewish kid in Providence during the 50s. Israel was not secure. The Holocaust was a fresh wound. My parents couldn't buy houses in certain neighborhoods or join certain organizations. So you can imagine what a thrill it was one Saturday morning when something extraordinary happened. When Brown University had home football games, they'd parade from the campus down to the stadium right near my house. One Saturday, I came running home. Mom, Dad, you won't believe it. Brown's playing a Jewish college. They said, what do you mean a Jewish college? I said, it's a Jewish college. They got Jewish coaches, Jewish cheerleaders, a whole bunch of Jewish football players. They said, what's the name of this Jewish college? I said, Temple University. That was always pretty funny. As a kid, the word we used to use for our rear end was not fanny or butt. We called it a tutu. And it might have been just our family's word, but I can recall when I was real small, a babysitter came. She said, does anyone want to go to the park? One kid said, I want to go. My sister said, I want to go too. And I can remember saying, I want to go too. Now, you may not think that's so hysterical, but I remember thinking at that very moment, I am one funny toddler. So my goal is to become a celebrity. I want to climb the celebrity ladder step by step. For example, right now I perform at clubs, organizations, theaters all across America. Eventually I'd like to be on The Tonight Show, have my own Netflix special, and then someday the Betty Ford Clinic. I know what you've been thinking. You've been watching me for a while. People tell me this all the time. It's always been part of my my way of doing things. They say, given the way I look and the way I sound, if ever Steve Martin and Alan Alda were to have a child, I was doing a show in England one time, and somebody came up and said, you know, you look so much like our former Prime Minister, John Major. I said, yes, and when I wear a dress, I look like Margaret Thatcher. And everyone reminds me of the fact there was a rabbi comedian, Jackie Mason, passed away recently. Yeah. There are a couple of differences between me and Jackie Mason. First of all, I'm still a practicing rabbi, always will be. He did it for a short time and then it's not. The second thing is the accent. To me, Jackie Mason doesn't sound Jewish. In my view, an authentic Jewish accent is like my grandfather's, something he derived from that faraway land of his birth, Bangor, Maine. I can hear him now saying, well, Bobby, got to get you down to the synagogue. Yeah, start you studying for your bar mitzvah. I mean, to me, that's a Jewish accent. My grandfather loved telling stories. He told us he was on the bridge of the Bar Harbor Ferry one time, talking with the captain when a very proper society matron joined the conversation. Suddenly a seagull flew over and made a dropping, splat onto the captain's lapel. Oh my goodness, said the matron, I'll run and get some toilet paper. And the captain replied, oh, don't you bother. By the time you get back, that bird will be a half a mile from here. I'm fourth and fifth generation American born. I don't speak Yiddish. I don't understand much Yiddish. I felt bad about that. I was doing a show in Baltimore one night when a man came over and said, Rabbi, your performance was geschmechte bezigli beschmachen bethacham. Now, which I think was a compliment. Well, because he had a broad smile and he used a lot of phlegm. Of course, we've just finished the Jewish High Holy Days. This is the time of year around Yom Kippur when I like to go around to family and friends and tell them, if there's anything during the past year I've said or done that has hurt you or offended you, I want you to know you're too sensitive. So I'm 78. It's not that bad. My hero is Harrison Ford, who is 81. You aware of that? 81. He's making another movie. It's going to be called Indiana Jones and the Enlarged Prostate. Well, they'll test market that joke. If that title doesn't work, the backup title is Indiana Jones and the Reverse Mortgage. And then he's got another project. Remember The Fugitive? Not the TV series, the movie, The Fugitive, that he was in. A new episode coming out. In this one, Dr. Richard Kimball flees assisted living. My wife and I have been married for 54 years. Thank you. We met in Bennington, Vermont. My parents had moved there, and after my sophomore year at Lehigh, I came home, and I was hanging out with a friend of mine whose younger sister was hosting a slumber party for 6 girls with whom she just graduated from high school. We crashed the party, and for some reason they were sitting on the floor of the kitchen. I looked down, I saw one really cute girl wearing pink baby doll pajamas. And I thought to myself, wow, I bet she would look hot in clothes. And back when we were married, women didn't have the choices they have today. Today, women can take their husband's names, they can keep their maiden names, they can hyphenate. Back then, my wife did the traditional thing. She took my name. Her name used to be Sherry Zink, and now it's Bob Zink. And our lives are totally in sync. For example, at the same time I got hearing aids, she stopped mumbling. Now, let me tell you about that joke, okay? In 2015, when the Pope came to America, an international Christian Catholic charity called the Pontifical Mission Societies decided that the Pope has a great sense of humor. Let's have a joke with the Pope contest. So they did. They asked people to send in the joke that the Pope would like to a website. It was first announced by Jimmy Fallon on The Tonight Show. On the website, you could see jokes told by Jimmy Fallon, Bill Murray, Al Roker, Cardinal Dolan, Brooke Shields. They had 4,000 entries from 47 countries. And that joke I just told about the hearing aids, the winner. Thank you. I am the honorary comedic advisor to the Pope. International public, South African puppet news show did a whole thing on the rabbi who's the Pope's comedy advisor. I figured, if I ever met the Pope, I wouldn't tell him that joke. Look, the Pope speaks 4 languages. English is his 4th language. I'd need to tell him a joke that has repeated words, simple language. So here's the joke I'd probably tell the Pope. Hello, sweetheart, is your mommy home? Mommy's busy. Was Daddy? Daddy's busy. Was anyone else? The firemen. Or let me talk to one of them. They're busy. Is anyone else? The policeman. All right, sweetie, put one of them. They're busy. Well, what are they all doing? They're looking for me. So Sherry's a psychotherapist. We have a good arrangement professionally. I don't criticize the way she does therapy, and she criticizes the way I do comedy. So that works pretty well. We have certain medical issues that we deal with. For example, Sherry had a colonoscopy, and routine, good thing to do. I was in the hospital. She was upstairs, and there was one other man in the waiting room watching TV that was blaring. And I was in the other end of the room trying to read. A nurse walked in. She said, Mr. Albert? I said, well, it's Alper. She said, well, your wife is all set. Let me take you to her room. When we got there, she said, would you like me to see if she's ready? I said, no, thank you. We've been married for 54 years. So I walked into the room, and there was Mrs. Albert. She was not ready. Not happy either. Sherry tells me of some of the people she works with. One of her colleagues told her a story about counseling a couple around the issue of communication in their marriage. At a certain point, she said to the wife, well, let me ask you, how do you express when you want to make love? The woman said, well, I say, sweetheart, I'm going upstairs now. I'm going to take a long, hot shower. Her husband said, that's what you've been telling me? All these years, I thought you meant I shouldn't run the dishwasher. I'm going to use two words that I think have never been uttered on the stage of the famous comedy cabaret. I'm going to use the words urethra and cystoscopy. I would venture no other comic has ever used it. I Googled it. No one did. I had to have my bladder examined, and what he found was lovely. In fact, my urologist has pictures of my bladder on the waiting room wall. Perfect. To examine your bladder, what they do is they take a tube through your urethra into your bladder. And at the end of the tube, there's a light and a camera on a little tiny iPhone 12. So I'm waiting there, and the anesthesiologist walked in with a very attractive young woman. He said, "This is Dr. Richmond. She's a resident, and she'd like to observe the procedure." I thought, great, it's not humiliating enough. I thought, I'll be asleep. I said, fine. And I said to her, so what's your specialty? She said, podiatry. And the thing is, when I woke up, all of my toenails had been trimmed. And the next day, she friended me on Facebook. We have two children. We have an adorable 51-year-old, cute as a button 47-year-old, both still in the gifted program. You know, I remember the toughest time raising kids was teenage years. I don't need to tell you that. It's a tough time. The Bible, though, has something to say about that. According to one of the commentators, the reason Abraham was about to sacrifice Isaac at the age of 12 and not 13 is because at 13, it wouldn't have been a sacrifice. A friend of my daughter's had a boyfriend in college that her parents always referred to him as her Christian suitor. And the reason they called him her Christian suitor is because his name was Christian Suitor. We follow Jewish tradition in our family. We've named our son after my grandfather. We call him Grandpa. We got some good news about him years ago. We found out we were able to arrange a student loan for him. We loaned him to a family in Iowa. We have little kids in our family. My nephew has 10-year-old twins. He's always saying to them, remember, one of you was unplanned. And my niece has a 4-year-old grandson. And we were at a restaurant. He had to go to the bathroom, so I took him. He went into the stall. I was out there by the sink. And apparently they had one of these electric toilets with a blinking red light. At a certain point I heard him say, "You know, Uncle Bob, these things take your picture." Called a friend of mine, his 3-year-old answered the phone. She said, "My daddy took me to the animal zoo. My daddy's the best daddy in the world. I love my daddy." He got on the phone. I said, "Carl, enjoy her while she's stupid." Our family's rounded out by our pets. We have a couple of cats. We had 2 dogs, and I miss them terribly. They were wonderful. We had one after the other. The first dog was we got him from Florida. He was a victim of one of the hurricanes down there. Whenever that happens, the dogs either lose their homes or they're blown away and they can't be found again. So what they did was they took the dogs, they put them in pounds for a few months till they organized to the point where they were able to take the purebred dogs and fly them to kennel societies all around the country for adoption. Our dog was one of them, although he was a mongrel. He came up by bus. Greyhound. I have to say that. I'm sorry. I just have to say that. It's an impulse within me. I have to say that. Turned out he was a real southern dog. You know, dogs in our neighborhood, when they bark, you'd hear woof, woof. And when Giddy would bark, you'd hear woof, woof. So we lost him, and a pet's death is tough. There's a show called Kids Say the Darndest Things with Art Linkletter years ago, remember? They revived it with a new host. Anyway, the little boy had a very sad expression. Linkletter said, "What's the matter?" And the kid said, "Well, my dog died." Linkletter said, "Well, now your dog's in heaven." And the kid says, "What does God want with a dead dog?" I heard about a family where the boy's dog killed his turtle. So they had a funeral in the backyard. They're standing around this hole in the ground. And finally, little Michael said, "Is anyone going to say anything?" And his mother said, "Michael, why don't you? Because you knew him best." Kid thought for a minute. He said, "Baruch atah Adonai, turtle's gotta die." I told this to a Presbyterian friend of mine. He said, "Same thing in our family. My daughter's goldfish died." So they had a funeral in the backyard, and they're standing around, and the little girl of 7, she was officiating, and she ended by saying, "Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and into the Holy Ghost." So we waited a year or so, and then we decided it was time to adopt another dog. I mean, adopt, like, is there any other way? Well, we had him naturally. No, you didn't. No. The only way you get a dog is you adopt a dog. So we adopted a dog. And we learned a few things about his background. First of all, he was born to a single mom. And he came from Puerto Rico. There's a terrible dog problem in Puerto Rico. They have thousands of dogs. They're called satos, street dogs. And they found the litter. They were just recently born. They took them in, saved them, weaned them, all that. And then he came to America, and he was fostered for a couple of months, and we got him. The problem was he arrived with the name Jesus. Jewish family, dog named Jesus. So we decided to compromise. We called him Zeus. Zeus. Then as we had to get his attention, we'd say, "Hey, Zeus!" You know. He wasn't a Zeus. You know, dogs grow into their name. He's a Barney. That was his name. Barney. His official name, the one that we registered with the American Mongrel Association, was Dr. Bernard K. Fine Dog. He's a great dog. He has things that go on in your life that are kind of strange, where the dogs and the owners, there's a little reciprocity. They begin to look alike. Reciprocity goes on between them. In our house, it was kind of strange. My dog would give me kisses, and my wife would turn around 3 times before she sat. He had kennel cough. Took him to the vet. The vet said, "Give him these pills. What you want to do is wrap them up in cheese so he'll take them," which he did, and he was fine. Like 2 or 3 days, he was fine. But he apparently really liked the taste of that cheese. Because after that, every once in a while, he'd walk over to us and go, I had a friend who had his dog with him in the car, and he went to IKEA, and it was very hot. There's no way he's going to leave the dog in the car, of course. And he noticed other people were taking dogs in, so he took the dog with him. But a guard stopped him and said, "Sir, is that a service animal?" He said, "Yes, it is." He said, "Describe his duties." He said, "Brown." We have a couple cats. Cats don't do tricks, but we have a cat that does a trick. I'm going to tell you what it is, because you may not believe it. And if you do, you might be able to teach your cat. Her name is Loretta, and I can hold her in my arms and say, "Loretta, feign indifference." Our other cat, my wife named him Bob Jr., that's true, Bob Jr. likes to sleep between my head and my wife's head. And I noticed at one point that I said, Sherry, do you realize he sleeps with his face towards me and his butt towards you? He does that because he loves me. She said, no, he does that because he trusts me. Thank you very much. You've been a wonderful audience. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Wow.